Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all from around the world. My name is Shenkun Lu. I'm CEO of Friends of Multilateralism Group. So a big welcome to you all for participating on this session of FMG on the MSMEs. That's what we call in WTO, so the micro, medium, and small size enterprises. All know very well how important these enterprises play in the national economy. We have good speakers who will be sharing with us their insights today. So I have only two words to say at the beginning. The first thing is that you know that FMG follows a lot of things on WTO reform, including those what we call the plurilaterals, including some joint statements initiatives. And we have done quite a few on e-commerce assets. And then MSMEs is one of them. And we are planning also a few more in the future. So that's one. So please follow us, and then you will be hearing from us very soon on these sessions. The second thing I want to say is that Chris Van from ICC, the chief representative of ICC in Geneva, he accepted to moderate the session today, but suddenly he had to leave Geneva yesterday, so that we will not have him. But we thank him. I just want to take this opportunity to thank him and ICC for working with our group in the past few years and for their support. And I also thank Patrick Law, our member, and also the chairman, co-chair of our board, to kindly help with the moderation at such short notice. So with that, I give floor to Patrick. Please, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lou, and greetings to everybody. I see from the program that I've got 3 minutes, so I'm not expected to say anything sensible or knowledgeable about MSMEs. As I like to call them MSMEs, because the rest is a bit of a mouthful: mini, micro, small, medium-sized enterprises. Just refer to them as MSMEs. Anyhow, we're privileged to have Ambassador Cancela from Uruguay, who's the president of the working group, informal working group on this issue, and Kathryn Lundquist from WTO, who definitely got there after I left, so I don't think I know you, and Valentina Rollo from the ITC. So welcome to all of you, and you're invited to speak for 10 minutes or so on this issue. I guess you'll all take various positions on it, and then we'll have time for a discussion. So if you can keep your remarks to 10 minutes or so, that would be helpful. And with that, I would like to invite Ambassador Cancela to take the floor. Where do I start?
Hello. Excuses, but Ambassador Cancela will be here in a minute. He has got some problems with the traffic, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's becoming quite common in Geneva.
Yes. So apologize. He will be here shortly.
You know how long, more or less? Do you know more or less how long it's going to be? Because I'm wondering whether we shift the order. I think we should probably change the order, because otherwise we're going to lose valuable time. So the next person on the list is Kathryn. Kathryn, why don't you speak first?
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome to everybody. My name is Kathryn Lundquist. Indeed, I did not have the pleasure of working in the Economic Research and Statistics Division with you, Patrick, but I have heard your name continues, your legacy continues at the WTO. So I'm happy to be introduced, at least virtually at this point. Let me share my screen. I'm going to present to everybody a little bit about the work, the research work that the Secretariat has done in their role to support the MSME Informal Working Group, which Ambassador Cancela is the chair of, and he will take over and explain a little bit more. But I think, having looked at the names, I believe many of you are already familiar with the work of the group. So what are the WTO MSME research notes? This is a new series that we have put together in 2022. They are mostly to update on MSME-related trade statistics, but they also review sources of MSME information and look to investigate emerging trade issues for small businesses. The current research notes that I'm going to present, there were 3 that were released on MSME Day this past year, so in June 2022. These are all available on the WTO Small Business webpage, but I will include links throughout the report in case you want to find out more information. So essentially, this is going to be a brief update on MSME trade statistics and a little bit about the work that we do. So the first of these 3 MSME research notes is on the recent evolution of developed economy MSME participation in international trade. This is essentially an update of the 2016 WTO World Trade Report on MSMEs and trade, and it uses OECD statistics to look at, OECD members and their MSME trade within their economies. So micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises comprise 94% of industrial firms in the OECD economies, according to our update. This is largely unchanged from the 2016 World Trade Report. Over and over again, we see statistics, and I mean, it makes sense as well. Just the sheer number of MSMEs means that they are the largest share of firms in the world, although large firms tend to dominate trade. And this can be seen in these updated statistics, where only 38% of exports and 41% of imports can be attributed to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in these economies. However, the good news is that the MSME's share has slightly increased from the 2016 World Trade Report. In that research, only 34% of exports were attributable to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and 38% of imports. So up by a few percent. It remains to be seen whether this trend continues. There's also large variability across economies, where smaller economies we found, like Cyprus, Latvia, or Estonia, had larger shares of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in their economy, and therefore larger shares of trade. And I just want to show you a few figures from this note. So in this case, here are the MSME shares of exporting and importing companies in developed economies. You will see across the board for all of the reviewed economies, the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, so the blue and the purple, represented the majority of firms in the economies, in the developed economies, whereas large firms were much smaller share. Granted that the value of trade or of sales would probably show a different visualization. However, it's still important to understand where the majority of firms are. We also just noted, and this is true in the 2016 World Trade Report, that there is quite a bit of variation across the sectors that small and medium-sized enterprises participate in. Here you can see that developed economy MSMEs import more services than any other economic sector, but when it comes to exports, the value generated by MSMEs in manufactured goods and services is split roughly evenly. So it's just important to understand that there are these differences across sectors, and that it can vary very substantially, especially for small businesses. Now I want to move on to the second research note, which has the focus on small and medium and manufacturing enterprises in their trade participation in developing economies. And this is based on the 2016 World Trade Report. It's an update. It's an update on only the manufacturing firms, because there was a recent WTO World Trade Report on services where MSMEs are identified and their trade is discussed, in case you're interested in learning more. But in this case, in our research note 2, using the World Bank Enterprise Service and Enterprise Survey statistics from 2016 to 2021, we see that SMEs in developing economies and less developed countries are primarily engaged in domestic sales rather than exports. This is, again, the same as what was found in the 2016 World Trade Report. However, roughly 1/3 of inputs that they import are from foreign sources. So in other words, they are more closely linked with backward global value chains, even if they're not exporting as much. SMEs in developing economies also report higher participation in upstream, less technology-intensive sectors, and I don't think there's any surprise there, but it's always important to check and see whether there have been changes over time. Again, I just want to show a few of the figures from these research notes. So here we can see that SMEs in LDCs and developing economies are more focused in national sales, as I already noted. Developing economies, only 11.5% of total sales were direct direct exports by MSMEs, whereas over 84% of their sales were domestic national sales. For LDCs, this is an even starker difference, where only around 8%, 7.9% were direct exports compared to 88% for national sales. And here we can see the relatively higher shares of foreign inputs in developing economies production. So as you can see, across the board, around 33% of inputs into production are foreign sourced, as opposed to 2/3, which are domestically sourced. And this is an interesting contrast from the export side. But then in terms of global value chains, we did a little additional research and a little update from the 2016 World Trade Report. You can see that foreign-owned small and medium-sized enterprises in developing economies within certain sectors, including textiles and garments, automotives, and leather, demonstrate much higher global value chain participation as opposed to other sectors. So again, there's a sectoral difference. It really depends for similar to the developed economies, where MSMEs are most likely to trade. And it's important to have that connection abroad. So if it's foreign owned and it already has that connection, they're more likely to trade or be involved in global value chains. And just for the last research note, this one is slightly different. It uses survey statistics sourced from Meta, or previously known as Facebook. And the surveys were conducted in 2021 of small and medium-sized enterprises to see what their perception was of climate change and its effect on business. The link to trade was not as direct. However, I think there were important trade findings, particularly in terms of value chains and supply chains. So to address climate change, basically businesses of all sizes are aware of the need to contribute to decarbonization, and they're concerned about it, but they don't always know what to do. And I think there are certain key policy takeaways from this research note that are important. Just to say a little bit about the data itself, there were surveys from 30 economies, so it's not global. However, it was a broad range, including certain developing economies. And however, it was primarily focused in North America and Europe, fewer in Africa and South America. And Asia as well was included in the surveys. Yeah, so I noted that MSMEs are concerned about climate change, especially its impact on supply chains, but they also lack additional knowledge. They don't know how to make changes that are needed to decarbonize their production, and they are worried about the cost implications that it would have. So I think this is all important as we move forward, especially with COP27 and the concerns about climate change. And here I just have a couple graphics again to show. So there is also a differentiation in the note between female and male respondents. And you can see that overall, female-male respondents had similar shares of climate concerns for their businesses, but that women are more likely to be unfamiliar with the impacts of climate change. So this is an important knowledge difference, where access to information is critical, and the difference within gender is important to take note of. Also want to show this graphic where more than half of the economies that were covered by the survey cited knowledge of how to reduce carbon emissions as their largest barrier to decarbonizing. Again, an important takeaway for policymakers. And then just in terms of supply chains, I wanted to note that respondents in economies that are more closely linked to global value chains, such as Canada, Chinese Taipei, and Vietnam all appeared at the top with relatively higher concern about the effects of severe weather on supply chains. Obviously, there are concerns about disruptions and the way that it would impact their business. Beyond these three research notes, I also just wanted to highlight that more research from the Secretariat of the MSME Group can be found on the WTO Small Business and Trade webpage. We have recently released a working document on regional trade agreements, a literature review. There are also two databases, one on regional trade agreements and the other on MSME references and trade policy reviews that you might find of interest. That we also released a note in 2020 regarding helping MSMEs navigate the COVID-19 crisis. Obviously, a little dated 2 years on, but just to highlight things that we've done. So yes, and I noted the MSME Group working document number in case it's of interest. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and here are the links in case you would like to read through the research notes.
Thank you very much, Kathryn, for that. I have a couple of questions, but I'll save them up in case there's a chance to ask them at the end. Could we turn to Ambassador Cancela? Welcome, Ambassador, and please go ahead. 10 minutes or so.
Good afternoon and good morning. Nice to see so many friends here gathered. First of all, let me apologize for being late. I had some traffic problems arriving at my office, so once again, I apologize for that. But let me begin by saying that I'm honored to participate in such a brainstorming session dedicated to the integration of MSMEs with the multilateral trading system. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the Friends of Multilateralism for their very kind invitation and for continuously supporting the work of the Informal Working Group on MSMEs. As you know, the preamble of the Marrakesh Agreement establishing the WTO called on the organization to facilitate trade relations with a view to raising standards of living. For this to happen, WTO needs to ensure that trade benefits extend to micro, small, and medium enterprises all over the world. This is well known, but I think it's convenient to recall it. 93% of companies, approximately across the globe, are MSMEs, and they account for 60% of the world's total employment. However, MSMEs face a number of obstacles when seeking to participate in international trade. To address these obstacles, the MSME Group was launched in 2017 to bring the topic of small businesses to WTO in a more comprehensive manner. Our work focuses on identifying horizontal and non-discriminatory measures that can help MSMEs trade internationally and benefit from trade rules through the sharing of good practices and by developing recommendations to help MSMEs trade. As there is no universal definition of MSMEs, the group leaves it to each member to define who their MSMEs are. So we do not prescribe a definition of MSMEs. We have considered that it's more convenient and more useful for MSMEs themselves to have a pragmatic and practical orientation and leave each member to define what it considers a MSME and to concentrate on the discussion of concrete issues. Of course, COVID-19 and other global disruptions have underscored the importance of MSMEs for people's livelihoods and for global productivity, making the WTO support for MSMEs more important than ever. MSMEs were some of the hardest hit firms in the pandemic, given their prevalence in the sectors like retail and tourism. Building resilience require a multifaceted approach. Financing solutions and digitalization will be important elements of the recovery for MSMEs from the current economic downturn. The group endeavors to look at all these issues in a holistic manner to support MSMEs. The group has now grown to 95 members from all regions of the world and all levels of development. The group works to negotiate soft law, that is the way we work, and tries to be an incubator of new ideas to support businesses of every size to trade, but especially small businesses. As some of you may already know, on the 11th December 2020, a package of 6 recommendations and declarations were adopted on issues including MSMEs reference in trade policy reviews, access to information, trade facilitation, MSME inclusion in regulatory development, automated exchange of trade data, and access to finance and cross-border payments. Our efforts are now concentrated on the implementation of this package, and several members are reporting on how they are working to implement this package. But the MSME group is also a do tank, not only a think tank. One of the focuses of the group has been concrete tools to help MSMEs to trade. Early on the group, we realized that access to the right information is always a challenge for small businesses, as they often don't even know where to begin when they want to ship their product or deliver their services to other markets. So the group also realized that there are many great resources already available online, like the Global Trade Help Desk that many of you know, or She Trades, that help small businesses to trade. Businesses, in our perception, just needed a place to find them all. That was the inspiration for the development of the Trade for MSMEs web platform that you can see in your screens now, which was launched in December 2021. This platform is unique because it is both for MSMEs themselves and for policymakers. The information is presented in 2 sections with different guides and a library of resources for the 2 user groups. Businesses can click on the MSME link and be brought to a roadmap that helps guide a new trader through the trading process, starting from for trading services, what should I know? Or before trading goods, what should I know? All the way to what happens when there is a trade disagreement. I think I don't see the roadmap now. Maybe we have some problems to change the slides here. We can. Okay, let's see if we can put the roadmap on the screen. Well, while we are solving that, here you have the roadmap, and as I was saying, the idea is to help and guide a new trader through the whole trading process with this kind of questions that you can see on the screen. How do I get my goods across borders? What is trade finance and how can I access to it? Each of these stops that you can see here contains a list of guides. For example, if you click on how can I make the best use of digital tools to trade, a list of questions like how can I benefit from e-commerce are listed along with related guides like selling abroad online, or assessing e-commerce readiness. These guides then contain a short introduction to the topic with related links where users can learn more on the particular issue. Here you can see the guide. Well, I hope you will see the guide. Yeah, okay. The guide Selling Abroad Online, with an introduction to the topic and resources for where a user can learn more. This is similar for policymakers who can access a number of topics like why MSMEs and trade, or what is happening at the international and regional level for MSME trade policy. Policymaker guides are available under what are some key issues to help MSMEs trade. Those issues range from cross-cutting issues like gender to more specific areas like digitalization and regulation. Trade for MSMEs is still under development, and new guides and features continue to be issued. For MSMEs, these guides are on exchanging rates, reverse logistics, cross-border paperless trade, standards, voluntary sustainability standards. In addition to grouping-related information, new guides on government procurement, investment facilitation, MSMEs and competition policy, regional trade agreements and MSMEs, the Think Small principle, trade remedies, and guides with policymaker considerations for cross-border paperless trade and voluntary sustainability standards have now been included. The libraries are also another resource for users that may already be familiar with some of these topics, but want to find additional MSME-related information. These libraries are accessible through each of the user entry points, and they are sorted by subject. Additional information continues to be added, and more regional resources are being identified and included on the site. To keep the information up to date, the MSME Group contacted a group of international organizations and regional development banks that work to support MSME trade. In June 2022, the group launched the Trade for MSMEs network, and many of these organizations are now also partners to this site. Trade resources for MSMEs and policy considerations are always evolving, and these networks hope to share resources and best practices among participants to keep Trade for MSMEs relevant and updated. For example, WIPO's new online intellectual property diagnostic toolkit and series of information guides for business was shared at the first meeting of the Trade for MSMEs network. This tool steps businesses through a series of questions to identify relevant IP information for the user. The guides also contain specific information on international trade and IP considerations for businesses in foreign markets. Trade for MSMEs is a living site. New information continue to be added, and we encourage your feedback for improvement or additional information that would be helpful to you. Those looking at the site are invited to contact us through the homepage and sign up for updates. This will provide you with the MSME Group's newsletter, which contains any Trade for MSMEs website developments, as well as informs you about the work that we do at the WTO MSME Group. If you have resources or other suggestions, we invite you to send them to. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share Trade for MSMEs. This platform is both meant to be a starting point for businesses and a link between all the great tools already out there, like I said before, the Global Trade Help Desk or the WIPO's IP Diagnostic Toolkit. It's also a resource for policymakers on the many MSME trade considerations that are being discussed. Well, with that, I hope that you will all visit the site. Now, if you allow me, I would like to know that on MSME Day in 2021, the group launched the Digital Champions for Small Businesses initiative in partnership with the International Chamber of Commerce and the International Trade Center. The initiative aimed to support small businesses' participation in international trade by helping them to go digital. More than 100 proposals were received, and 4 winners were announced in December 2021. Given the success of that edition, it was decided to make this competition annual. So the 2022 edition was launched on the 27th June, the MSME Day, and this year our initiative aimed to respond to the urgency for action to address climate change by supporting small businesses to transition to more sustainable businesses practices and contribute to global decarbonization. Entrepreneurs are needed to catalyze the sustainability innovations needed to reduce carbon footprint and to mitigate the devastating consequences of climate change. MSMEs are often willing to innovate to reduce emissions, but face key barriers such as high operational costs and lack of knowledge of decarbonization practices. So out of the nearly 90 applications that were received from around the world, 2 winners and 2 runners-up were selected. Last but not least, the group values direct communication with the small businesses, and we hold yearly meetings with the private sector to hear their views on the key challenges faced by small businesses to trade internationally. I would say that the work together with the private sector is key in the work we do at the group and the discussions we have. We are now discussing our future work, let's say, for this year, exploring issues related to regional trade agreements, cross-border payments, low-value shipments, trade digitalization, applying gender perspectives to MSME trade, green trade, innovation, and rural MSME. So this is a quick image of the work we are doing in the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Well, you are presiding over a very busy and active working group, even if you're not making law. Okay, so Valentina, please, over to you.
Yes, with pleasure. Let me share my screen, and I hope, voila, that it works. If you can see it, I will be happy to start my presentation. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Valentina Rollo from the International Trade Center. Thanks for the invite. Thanks to the Friends of Multilateralism Group, and thank you for the presenters that started this session. We are part of the working group on SMEs, so we are very aware and committed to this group. And I thank Kathryn because it was very good for me to have already this first presentation, so that I can focus on a specific topic. So as you know, ITC is the UN agency dedicated to SMEs, to small businesses. And every year we not only collect data on SMEs through the SME competitiveness survey that I manage, but we also publish a flagship publication on SME competitiveness. So every year, of course, we, apart from focusing on SME competitiveness, we look at it from a different angle. So we have different topics every year. And this year, so in September 2022, 2 months ago, we launched the new flagship, so the new outlook, which is on connected services. So I will talk about SMEs and SMEs competitiveness, but from the services point of view today. Before starting and before explaining what connected services are, for those of you, I mean, I know that many of you were already at the launch of the WTO, but I think it's important to probably put this in context. And I don't need to explain to you that we are in a rather negative, I would say, context, economically speaking, and not only politically speaking. We are dealing with what's been called the 3 Cs, so COVID, conflict, and climate. While many of us in Geneva and in many countries see already COVID as something related to the past, we also see that the recovery from the pandemic is fragile. And it's very unequal. So we see that all countries, but especially developing and least developed countries, are coming out from this pandemic already with high levels of debt. And to this, so once demand finally rebounded, supply and supply chains were not fully functional and normalized, and we continue to see this. To this, we have added the bad consequences of the conflict, of the war, and high levels of inflation. Prices are increasing everywhere. Poverty is increasing. So, and not to mention the last C, the strong and unpredictable effects of climate change. So all countries are facing an important challenge to boost growth under very constrained financial circumstances. So in the past, the solution, let's say the usual solution, was to try to boost production, use manufacturing to push growth and employment. However, many experts have already pointed and highlighted the fact that global manufacturing opportunities are sort of overfished, and there are less opportunities for developing countries to break into manufacturing, because it's becoming concentrated in a few countries. And automation also means that the ability of manufacturing to provide jobs to the masses, especially unskilled labor, is low. So automation is reducing also these benefits. So today we see, and I mean today has been in the past probably decade, we have seen more and more resources allocated to services, and more output accounted for by services. So in 2019, actually in 80% of countries, GDP was, services were the main driver of GDP already. So there is no doubt that services are important, and we need to look at services. But today, I'm not going to talk about services in general. I'm talking about a specific set of services, because what I will argue today is that not services are equal in any case. And so what was so transformative, let's say, about manufacturing is reflected in some services, not all. So what are the connected services that I'm presenting today? So ITC has coined, let's say, this term, connected services, and we refer to these four services, subsectors: transport and logistics, financial services, information and communication technologies, and business and professional services. So why these four sectors? So these sectors are at the center of two key important economic trends. On one side, servicification. So they are an important part, an increasing important of value in value chains, and digitalization. So they are able to connect companies to digital innovation. So here you see the various services, subsectors, and connected services are those in white. So at the top right quadrant, and it means that they have a high level of servicification and a high level of digitalization. So there are other services that are high on one or the other criteria, but not necessarily on both. So these connected services are important, and they have two important effects in their positive effect overall to economic transformation. They have direct effects because so they're important in their own right, in the sense that they create more jobs, more output, more exports, they can create innovation. So they directly contribute to economic transformation. But what is more important from the perspective of this report and the presentation that I'm making today are the indirect effects. So these connected services contribute to making companies in other sectors more competitive, and SMEs in particular as well. And that's the effect that I will discuss today, and I will focus on this second part. So to give you a few results, because I have 10 minutes, so I really need to get to the key results, and you will find much more in the report. I will give some examples of how, from our data, we see that connected services are contributing to increasing competitiveness of companies in other sectors. So what we see is that logistics services that are part of the connected services improve the inventory management practices of companies. So among companies with good access to high quality logistics services, 78% have good inventory management practices, compared to 36% of companies that have access to low quality of logistics services. And I mean, this is intuitive in a way. If you know that, if a company knows that they have good logistics services, they don't have to worry too much about stocks, about big inventories. Another example comes from access to finance. So when companies have access to high quality banking services, they tend to innovate more. And also this is intuitive because those who have the funds can invest in their ideas. And finally, another example from ICT, companies with good access to internet have a website, are more likely to have a website, and this is fundamental because it means that they have a digital presence, and a company must have a digital presence these days. Just imagine customers, how important customers' reviews are these days for a company to be able to purchase, to convince a customer to purchase its services. And so connected services are making definitely other companies more competitive, and there is a reason for this, apart from these direct examples. So when a small company starts outsourcing these services, on one side they benefit because they receive better quality services compared to what the company itself can do on its own. But at the same time, the manager of the company can see has more time and more resources to invest in the core activities and in the core offering of the company. So they can spend more time and more resources in the activities that are important. So there is a sort of double win in terms of efficiencies for the company. And what we know is that when companies are more efficient, they're more productive, and they are more likely to export, right? So we see also that in the data in a way. Well, we see, I'm not showing here, we see that companies that are more competitive export more, but this is not new. But we also see, we have disaggregated the data by regions in the countries that we have, and that we have seen that in regions with highly competitive connected services, there is a higher share of exporters as compared to regions with a lower competitiveness level of connected services. So the results are clearly seen in the data, and we can say this is a good news, but not everything is good, unfortunately, because not all the regions and not all the companies have equal access to these connected services and to services in general, of course. Now, what we see is that, as you would expect, unfortunately, larger firms are more likely to access connected services, and also, so you see 65% of companies, of large companies, show accessing the connected services compared to 38%. And even when small companies manage to access connected services, they're not very satisfied with the services that they receive. Now, here I've been talking about connected, so SMEs here as are the consumers, right? I'm talking about SMEs as consumers or users of connected services. But SMEs are also providers of connected services. It's true that when we talk about services, we always think about big companies, big tech companies, for example. But there are a lot of companies in connected services that are not the big UPS or UBS. There are a lot of small companies also in these services that are contributing a lot, that are innovating a lot. So we talked in the report, you will find a lot of stories as well that talk about these people, that show faces and their stories and the issues that they face when trying to operate. So what we see is that there are many small companies in these connected services. We also see that in services, 44% of workers are women, more than normally in manufacturing, and also youth is well represented in services. This means that there are important dividends also for inclusiveness and economic transformation in these services. So just to sum up, because I might have gone over time, our research definitely shows that the success, the competitiveness of firms depends on their access to services, connected services, and also the quality of these services. So it's important to invest resources to strengthen these services, and it's important to ensure that they operate under also a favorable regulatory environment. Because this eventually affects the current and future competitiveness of small business. And in this report, we highlight 4 areas where the competitiveness competencies, let's say, of connected services are lacking. And these areas are growing networks, innovation, deepening skills, and leveraging finance. And there is definitely something that companies can do by themselves to improve their own capabilities in these areas of work, but they're not alone. They also depend on the support of business support organizations, as well as governments in facilitating their competitiveness and their well functioning. So with this, I will stop. I will let's say the discussion start, and I let here the link for those interested in downloading the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina. So we have a good 40 minutes left for questions, observations. Who would like to start? Nobody. Then I can start if nobody else wants to start. Oh, Jonathan, you came to my rescue. Hi.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Can I go back to the very beginning in Kathryn's slides, because I need better understanding, and Patrick, you may have some insights as well. There's a set of slides that measure imports and exports, but then there's a couple of slides that talk about participation in value chains without differentiating how much of that is domestic versus international. And I ask because I wonder if we're starting from a faulty premise. If one takes today's world of, to borrow Pascal Lamy's famous phrase of made in the world, many MSMEs participate in the global economy by selling down the street. And they sell components or elements that go into further manufactured goods that ultimately end up on the international market. So they are indirect exporters, frankly, and I'm not sure the way we're tabulating statistics fully takes account of that nature of participation in global trade, because it looks like superficially it's just a domestic sale. But were it not for open trade, it wouldn't have taken place, because they're contributing to export trade in reality. So I wonder, again, whether we're starting from the right premise or underestimating, both in developed and developing countries, the extent to which MSMEs are part and parcel of international value chains.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. The data requirements for getting a real good handle on that are pretty forbidding. But Kathryn, you were the one who was making these statements, so go ahead.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And in fact, you started off with precisely the answer that I was going to give, which was that data are really what are prohibiting us in this. But Jonathan, you make excellent points. And in fact, well, if I'm going to be completely honest about the data that we use in this case from the World Bank Enterprise Survey statistics, they provide information on both direct and indirect exports. However, the indirect exports are mostly, it would not be the true definition of global value chain participation. In this case, it's third parties, it's sales to third party suppliers, it's sales of final goods to third-party suppliers who then export abroad, in which case it's not intermediate goods that are being used into further production. And it's a valid point that indeed there are a number of small businesses who probably are, or most definitely are participating on the domestic economy side, whose inputs then are used further downstream. However, it's we lack further detail. And so with the figures that I showed, sort of roughly estimating global value chain participation, it is, I don't know, waving my hands a little bit and making some magic. We followed what was done in the 2016 World Trade Report. However, it's noted even there that there are some, that these data are not the ones that you would really be looking for in order to do a precise estimate of this kind of participation. Overall, though, small businesses are more likely to trade indirectly than they are to trade with direct exports, at least in manufacturing items. And I think this has been shown in other studies as well. I think one that was done in 2018 at the WTO on developing economies and e-commerce participation in particular, or digital trade.
Yeah, I'll just add a quick footnote, because certainly taking Canada as an example and taking the automotive sector as a particular example, it's integrated in North America, and for each car that's assembled, smaller enterprises may contribute weaving a seatbelt and sending it down the road to the GM factory, which then puts it on a train and it crosses the border. And that's very significant if you add up all the parts suppliers that are outsourced, Magna, Linamar, Dentsu, and so on, and they all source. And that's somewhat arm's length, but often affiliated as well. So I just fear that we're overstating the problem. So I'll stop there.
Well, if it is a problem, I mean, one of the problems we have with all this analysis is that we don't even know what a MSME is, because every government defines it differently in terms of the job numbers of employers or employees or turnover or fixed assets. And really there's no systematic basis on which to make valid comparisons so you can actually say things about MSMEs in different places. And I'm quite sure that in the Canadian case, a lot of the MSMEs would probably choose to have stayed small and have survived for a long time. Anyway, Sherry, you wanted to say something.
Yes, thanks very much, Patrick. And thank you very much to the two speakers. Really comprehensive and excellent presentations. I was particularly pleased that Valentina spoke to the recent ITC report that emphasized services and MSMEs, because I think that's really an incredibly important area. I guess your overview was so comprehensive, and yet I thought perhaps you would be putting a little bit more emphasis on the digitization component and how that might make MSMEs more competitive and more able to not only be more inclusive, which is really important, I think, for the inclusivity aspect, given that women are nearly 50% of the employment in the small and medium-sized enterprise world. And digitization is the obvious way to get them to be able to participate more, because they can sometimes work from home, work part-time, do that at their own ability and own hours. And, you know, what's lacking there are obviously the digital skills and so forth. And I thought that, you know, if you tackle this further through digitization, you could get to a more competitive MSMEs panorama, which would obviously allow them to engage more in trade, and also a more inclusive panorama, which would be focused first and foremost by the MSMEs engagement and increased economic activity. So those are just comments. I thought you did a great job on explaining everything. And I totally agree that, you know, I've tried to work with this in the past, and it's really, really hard because there is no common definition of size. And therefore, it makes comparisons really difficult. And I think the focus has to be just on what you can do to make whatever MSMEs they are, by whatever definition, more competitive and more inclusive. And that would help, you know, GVCs around, help firms and economies around the world, particularly those in developing countries. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. Does anyone any of the speakers want to come back on any of that?
If I can add to that, thank you for the question. And you will be pleased to know that we have tried to collect more data actually on digitalization. So we are finalizing now a report that we'll present soon. We have a partnership with the CPCCAF, which is the chamber of all the chambers, let's say, of Francophone Africa. And with them, we collected data in countries in Francophone Africa on digitalization, so on the use of digital tools and on digital skills, to understand better, as you said, to understand better what are they missing, how exactly digital tools affect the competitiveness of companies, and what kind of skills they are missing in order to be able to use digital tools. And I mean, it's still preliminary. We are finalizing it, but it's interesting because we can see already that, for example, most companies use communication, so digital tools for communication, so for marketing, for advertising, for communicating with clients, but that's not what increases efficiency. So what gives efficiency gains and what decreases the costs and increased sales is actually the use of more advanced digital technologies. So we will have some results very soon that we will publish, but it's already interesting and it gives a little bit more of information. Hopefully we will be able to run the same module across, you know, in other regions of the world, but for the moment it's already interesting.
Thanks very much. That would be very interesting to read. Thanks.
I think we should let our CEO have his say. Lou?
Okay, Ambassador Cancela wants to add something. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Just very briefly, just to say that digitalization proved to be a critical feature, particularly during the COVID crisis. For many MSMEs all around, it was a question of to live or to die. I mean, many companies survived just because they were digital. They went digital. So that's a very important, and that's why we choose the issue of digitalization in our first launch of the Champions Initiative in 2021. But regarding the issue of the definition of MSMEs that we were mentioning before, and you, Patrick, too, as I said in my presentation, we renounced to look for a definition of MSMEs and to have a practical-oriented way of doing things. And not least, because I think it's not a relevant issue, because we have to keep in mind that what is good for a micro, small, or a medium business is good for every kind of business. It's good also for a multinational. So what we do in the group to benefit small businesses will benefit also a multinational. But the other way is not true. Many times, multinational companies, they have resources or things that will not necessarily benefit small businesses. So that's the real point. Of course, besides the definition that each state, each member can have around MSME. So thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Of course, one thing we're completely missing from the conversation so far is the challenge of informality. But let's go to Blue.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and thanks to all the three speakers for the great presentations. I have a question probably to Ambassador Cancela, and also Valentina probably also could help answer it. Because as Patrick said that the working group of MSMEs is the one who is making soft laws, so not hard laws. But all the things you're doing have a great value if we can implement them, and which soft law soft law could bring hard achievements. So what about the last ones that the working group has held a meeting has held a meeting on the implementation of the MSMEs working group package agreed in 2020. So
All right, he's gone off. Stuart, take the floor. Stuart. Hello, Stuart. You've got a bad connection too. Stuart, can you? No, you can't hear me. I don't know what's gone wrong with the system.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I must admit I've been having a couple of problems. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear. Good. Well, yeah, thanks very much to Ambassador Cancela and the panelists for a very, very interesting set of points that they come forward with. I don't feel so qualified, as well qualified as many of you, including you, Patrick, to comment on the substance of all of this, but my comment was more from a WTO systemic point of view, which is that I was really pleased to see this initiative coming forward. It's very rare, sadly, that trade policy is discussed in the WTO. It's all about mercantilist negotiations and litigation. And for a group of members to come together and actually to talk about trade policy in respect of companies, MSMEs in this case, I thought was a really tremendous initiative. And I very much welcomed the 6 recommendations and declarations that they were able to come forward with. I mean, we've often talked in the Friends of Multilateralism about the deliberative function of the WTO and the missing pillar in that respect. And I think this to some extent starts to fill the void. And I just hope that others will take up this baton and run with it. I'm sure my views are not shared by everybody. Obviously, there are a lot of people around who think that the WTO is about hard law, essentially. I personally don't agree with that, but I think it's an interesting debating point. But as I say, I think this is a great initiative, and I congratulate all of those involved. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Pascal Lamy was big on this. He used to talk about the missing middle. He really thought that deliberation would help both the legislative and the dispute settlement functions, which are the hard law aspect. So I don't know who really disagrees with this. But anyhow, Lou, we lost you because we couldn't hear anything.
Yeah, sorry, I was disconnected. I was trying to ask Ambassador Cancela, and also if Valentina could help also. It's about what Stuart just mentioned, the 2020, the package of 6 recommendations to help MSMEs. I saw that last month's WTO Working Group on MSMEs has held a meeting specifically talking about the implementation of this package of recommendations. I saw from the news that only 2 countries reported back, which is Uruguay and the EU. So I was just wondering, how about the other 93 participants, especially those less advanced developing countries, and also, if possible, some LDCs. And I assume that they should be also capacity constrained in implementing those, especially on trade facilitation, trade finance, so on and so forth. So my question would be that how the working group would try to help advance the implementation, especially for the less developing countries, LDCs, so on and so forth, and how the working group may use existing initiatives such as Aid for Trade of the WTO, and also the great work that ITC has always been trying to do to help developing countries their enterprises integrate into global supply chains, how this could come together to help advance the implementation of those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Any further panelists want to say anything? In which case, I'd like to just raise one issue, and I think Ambassador Cancela, it's a question for you, but it may also be relevant to for others. Informality, the informal sector, and a lot of MSMEs are in many developing countries are in the informal sector. I remember way back, just revealing my age now, in the mid-70s, the ILO and the World Bank undertook a joint study of informality, and it was on Kenya and Sri Lanka. And they came back saying, leave it alone, because that's where the new multimillionaires will come from, and the builders and the successful business people will come from that pool. If you start oppressing them and harassing them, you'll kill off the birth of a real process of diversification. But since that report has came out, things have changed dramatically. Informal sectors get bigger and bigger in so many countries, and it's become a problem. And I'm just wondering if you've been able to discuss this in the MSME group, or if anyone else has any views about it, because I don't really know how. It's not obvious to me what you do about it. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Well, thank you. If I may, to begin with, I would like to thank Stuart for its comments, and also Lou and you, Patrick. First of all, the 2020 December package, I would like to underline that at that year was the only deliverable that came out of WTO, even if it came from an deliverable that the organization produced that year. And I think this is important because Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, you can hear me now.
Oh, thanks. I think this is important because it shows something very important. That is that I think it's also critical that this organization, WTO, keeps up pace with the times. I mean, we cannot allow ourselves not to discuss the issues that are happening out of this building, that are happening in the international economy. And if you look around, MSMEs are an issue from G7 top down and from down to top everywhere. Every country is concerned about that because, as we said before, that's 95% of all economies. So can this organization avoid the policy discussions related to MSMEs? No, of course. For the time being, the way is not producing hard law. It's making guidelines or recommendations as you wish. Here it's important also to underline that the group is an informal group. So it goes on voluntary basis. And that is related to the question posed by Lou, because that means that we can invite the members to follow with the recommendations. But of course, what we do in our meetings, we have a standing item agenda for members to report on the implementation of the package. As you rightly point out, in the last meeting, well, there were just two countries, the EU and members, the EU and my own country that reported on some implementation issues. But I have to say that during all the meetings we have done before, there have been always groups of members or members individually that have reported on many of these issues. Of course, there are some members that are more, let's say, active than others in reporting progress, some of them quite active, I have to say. So my general impression as coordinator of the group is that, I mean, the package is being implemented with different speeds, and some countries more, I could say, enthusiastically than others. But there is a general sense of implementation that is going on. I have been particularly concerned with this fact because in the implementation of the package lays the credibility of the group. So for that very reason, it's an almost important thing for us. Of course, our aim is to become multilateral, and I hope that when that day arrives, when then we will have more tools, more instruments, if you want, to make a more comprehensive implementation follow-up. Regarding the informality sector question, we didn't have discussed that particularly in the group as such. But yeah, I share your concerns, and we think that precisely the kind of recommendation that we are doing or the kind of things we are doing helps many of these informal sector micros, most of them micro, small enterprises, let's put it in that way, makes it easier for them to come into the formal sector.
Right.
I think that to the extent that these enterprises, these entrepreneurs see that there are from the government, from the state, there are measures that helps them, that coach them to have better performances, then they will be more inclined to come into the formal sector, which of course will turn out in a global benefit for the economy.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Marcel.
Yeah, so thank you for the initiative, Marcel Venoy from the Netherlands. Thanks to Ambassador Cancela for his good work and the good spirit on this topic, and also Mrs. Rollo for the excellent work of ITC. I would also just like to echo the importance of looking at the informal sector and how they connect to SMEs, often first and foremost. And by the way, there's also a lot of informal trade, which sometimes we don't want to see. A good initiative, for example, is taken up by Trademark in East Africa, which has included opportunities for informal traders to get preferred access via one-stop border posts, for example. So there are good examples that the informal sector is considered to be a force for good, and that there are opportunities to, one way or another, formalize them. Another way of formalizing the informal sector could be via providing opportunities for banking, for example. It's not always the government that has to take the step to formalize the sector. And by the way, there are obvious reasons sometimes why they don't want to be formalized by the government. My question relates to it's another topic. It relates to the interface indeed between small business and multinationals. I think it was already mentioned by Mr. Fried. That of course in many situations they provide services or goods which are then brought to larger companies, and the larger companies are the ones that are trading. I'm not sure to what extent this is taken on board. It is an issue, for example, from the European perspective, when we talk about due diligence and transparent supply chains. Mostly the pressure is put on multinationals, and they have the opportunities, of course, to come across with clear information on whether child labor, for example, is involved in their own activities. But obviously, of course, they pass on this request for transparency also to smaller companies, and we're not sure whether this is really an issue which is properly addressed by us as governments, both again from the European perspective, but also I think for ITC and perhaps at a certain moment also for the World Trade Organization. It could be interesting to look at how smaller companies relate to the bigger ones when it comes to global value chains. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kathryn, you put your flag up and then down, just up again.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. I wanted to first compliment some of what Ambassador Cancela said, and after which I can then address the most recent comment. I just wanted to say regarding Lou's questions about the implementation that, and exactly as Ambassador Cancela said, it's been, I mean, a patchwork might be one way of saying it, but it's 6 different recommendations and declarations, and each one has to be implemented in a different way. And we've seen just a growing number of members who are implementing it. At this point, over 45 economies have verified their information on the Global Trade Help Desk to the ITC, and that was really critical for the second recommendation. For the first one regarding trade policy reviews, we've seen just sort of an explosion of references to micro, small, medium-sized enterprises and trade policies within TPRs, and each consecutive year, essentially every member of the MSME group has included either a chapter or a dedicated section as recommended in the recommendations on small businesses in their economy. Also, at this point, 2 economies have fully implemented the IDB decision, which is recommendation number 5. And it's been brought up a number of times about how to assist LDCs to implement the package, because I do want to note that there are more signatories of the package than are members of the informal working group. And this is in general just the inclusive nature of the MSME group to allow any WTO member to sign on to the agreements. And regarding informality, recommendation number 4 is regarding the think small first principle, which is important for regulations. In this case, of course, it's referring to trade, but in general, it's brought to members' mind front and center. How can small businesses be included in regulations in general and brought on board? Regarding small businesses and multinationals, and especially transparency, I was just working on some research in this regard, and it's indeed transparency in general is very hard for small businesses, and I think there's a lot of pushback against some of the regulations. On the other hand, there is some interesting data out there. When I looked at it in terms of garments and accessories production, you can see a trend in small businesses, first-tier suppliers to multinationals that are more likely to be smaller in developed economies, whereas in developing economies, those first-tier suppliers are more likely to be large manufacturing companies. So I think there's a big difference in terms of development, and it's something that should be looked into further. But it's an excellent point. So thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you, Valentina.
Yes, thank you. I just want to reply, but partially Kathryn already replied to Lou. So ITC continues to play its role, and I think that our role continues to be on the information side. ITC works a lot on providing tools for countries to have the information that they need to assist SMEs, and also for SMEs to better understand how to navigate the regulations, as well as how to diversify geography in terms of markets. So we will continue to do our part in this, and to also support companies specifically. So we have projects on digitalization. We definitely support women with our big She Trades program, and this is not this can only continue. On the informality discussion, I just want to, I don't have a solution, but definitely what I can say I've seen, so over the last 7 years that we have this project where we collect data with institutions across the world. I've seen an increasing interest in institutions and governments in terms of interest in understanding informal companies, and I've seen this switch and a big increase in interest during COVID, because they had to support business, and they were asking us to help them understand who they had to support, because they didn't have information about the informal business. So I think that has increased the interest, and the only problem that I see in doing these are resources, because it's possible, and I see, for example, now the African Union having a big interest in collecting data on informal firms. So I'm hopeful that maybe at some point it will be done, and we will find a way to do it systematically. And I'll stop here.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left. Does anyone want to raise any particular questions or issues? If not, I just have one more question, maybe for the ambassador and others. It's to do with survivability. I saw some numbers. I can't remember the numbers, unfortunately, because it's quite a while ago, that basically said that after 1 year, some rather non-trivial percentage of MSMEs fail. After 5 years, it gets to over half, quite a bit over half. And then either they fail, or they choose to stay small, or they become big. I don't know if that's an interesting analytical entry point for thinking about what policies are needed or not. Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, we haven't discussed that issue particular, but I think it's indeed an interesting point, particularly because we can figure out how the public policies can help these enterprises to survive, to develop, and I mean, being the particular focus of the group to help SMEs to integrate it into international trade. How we can better do that. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting issue. But of course, it goes also a little beyond what we as a group do. I mean, which is, as I said, focus on integration into international trade. But for that, I think it's important what I mentioned before regarding this network, sometimes I call constellation of organizations dealing with MSME issues, that we have to work together to a certain extent. We have to develop the capability of deliver something that is useful for MSMEs from the different angles of each of us works. No? But I think it's important that these synergies we can create among the different organizations that deal with MSME issues continues to develop. For example, I mean, just to give an example, WIPO has developed this toolkit on intellectual property rights, which I think it's extremely important, because usually intellectual property right is seen as some esoteric issue for lawyers and very far away from the MSMEs world. But reality, this toolkit, if you enter into it, you will see it, allows a small entrepreneur to evaluate if he has any IP element in his enterprise, in his business, to have a certain evaluation of this IP that it may have, and to learn how to use it for the purpose of its small business. So it might, in many cases, be also related to the survival of that small unit or not. Because usually we think about IP as brands or trademarks, things like that, which of course are, but sometimes these small businesses, they have kind of doing things, procedures, things that usually are not think of as IPs, but they are, and they can have some economic value for these enterprises. Leaving aside the whole issue of thinking about IP rights used as collaterals for access to finance for MSMEs, which I think will be a very interesting solution. So,
for all the years that I've been involved with the GATT and the WTO, one important thing has changed quite noticeably, and it's to do with how intergovernmental agencies seem more willing to cooperate than they used to when I started out in the beginning of the 80s. And you see this in digital, you see it in MSMEs. I think it's an extremely positive development, because there's a more kind of non-rivalrous attitude. In the old days, it was rivalrous, much less so now. And I think that is a big plus. We have 1 more minute for anybody who wants to make any comments.
If I may just quickly jump in on MSMEs and globalization. There is also research. It's important for MSMEs to trade abroad, because there's research that those born global MSMEs are more likely to survive, and those MSMEs who do trade internationally have higher survivability rates. So just from the research side, want to underscore that point. So thank you.
All right. Well, Lou, have you got anything to say?
Yeah, I just got 2 things, quick messages to pass. The first thing is that we are organizing what we call FMG Trade Policy Preview on the US on December 5th. So I think this will be of a particular interest for many of us, given the current situation, both internationally and also domestically in the US after the midterm elections. So please follow our invitations, and we're welcome to participate. The second is the same message I have been passing to the delegations of the think tanks organizations, that we FMG, after 6 years, we are trying to do what we call strategic review. So to reflect upon what we have done, what we have not done, and how we can better serve the system and also the member states. So we are going to do, of course, internally reflection, but what we would also welcome any comments, ideas, or criticism from all of you. So please do whatever format, pass a message, email, or coming to talk class. I would be happy to invite Ambassador Cancela and others for lunch, just to discuss all those things. So it will be very important for us to do better in the future to serve you. So I'll stop here. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Lou. And on that note, I'd just like to thank the speakers and everyone who's contributed, and see you next time. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to you. See you next. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.